At the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis and really across the Federal Reserve System, we really see the importance of diversity and inclusion work that we do every single day. And what we found is these employee resource networks, and the enthusiasm today is a good example, are a big part of those efforts. And Mary, given that topic, given we're talking about that today, I want to ask you to talk a little bit about the importance of diversity in the work that you do in research and economics.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll even broaden that to the work of public service. I know many of you have been paying attention to the news I have that has been debating the lack of diversity or being disclosing the lack of diversity in a variety of fields, especially in the private sector, in tech and finance. And I can't tell you whether if you're making widgets or some version of that, diversity matters. I think it does, but I can't tell you that for sure. But I know without any equivocation that it is essential to making public policy. And the reason it's essential, I mean, this is why I'm so delighted to be here. The reason it's essential is because public policy is the outcome of the people who make it. One of my great colleagues and friends, David Wilcox from the Board of Governors, says it in what I think is a beautiful way. He says it takes many sets of eyes to see the problems we have before us, and even different sets of eyes to see the solutions that are going to resolve those problems. And so if we don't have people at the table who reflect those views, we can't possibly make public policies that serve the people who we are intended to serve. So essentially, it's more than just a fairness issue, it's an essential issue. It makes us effective at our job, and it's one of the reasons I'm so proud to be here today, and it's also why I'm so proud of all of you for doing 9 Pride and thinking about the importance of diversity and inclusion in the workplace.
Can you give us sort of a perspective around the FOMC table? Because we talk about the regional nature of the Federal Reserve System and the input that I received from the various districts and through their presidents and through the governors. Can you talk a little bit about how the diversity perspective plays out?
Absolutely. So think about how the Federal Reserve was formed. The regional diversity was diversity of geography. And if you think about the 12 banks, it was made by the population centers at the time. So those don't necessarily reflect the population centers of today, or else the 12th district, which I'm a part of, would be 4 districts. But but in all seriousness, that was the first attempt to have diversity of thought at the table. Now we've aged a long way since then, and I think there's no person in the Federal Reserve System who thinks we're adequately diverse today. But it's a goal that we strive for, because around that FOMC table, you do need a diversity of perspectives. And when I've been talking to FOMC participants, I enjoy that diversity of perspectives. They're bringing not only what their district's doing, but their upbringing, their attitudes from where they went to school or who they grew up with. And that really helps, because we're ultimately making monetary policy for the people we serve. And so if we do, or even the payment systems or bank supervision and regulation, if we don't have that diversity of thought, then it's not just the FOMC table, it's the entire enterprise that we're in. We just lose track of what we're really doing.
Well, thanks. And I dove right into the questions, but let me just do a little process here. So I'm going to talk with Mary for a little while, and then I'm hopeful that after about a half an hour or so that we get some questions from the audience. So just a little process check. So we're gonna talk more. But so I'm going to have Pat show a picture. This is one of my favorites of you, Mary. And there's a lot of stuff going on here. Skateboard, flooded, lots of things going on here in this picture. A bit of art on the right side. One of the things you've mentioned is the different perspectives, and certainly you bring a unique approach, and because of who you are and how you started in your own personal story. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, this is my office, in case people are wondering. So that's actually what it looks like. People who know me know that is exactly what it looks like. And one of the things that you can see from this picture is that the Federal Reserve System has allowed me to be who I am. This is not your office of someone who feels constrained in themselves. So that's a good thing. And one of as Neil mentioned, one of the things that sort of defined who I am as a research economist, as a public policy contributor, is the upbringing I had. I dropped out of high school when I was 15 to work and to help support the income of my family. And
you sold donuts.
I sold donuts. Yeah. I did. My family had been in donuts. My grandparents in donuts. I drove a donut truck. I worked at Target on the side in baby clothes, and decided I did not want to hang things on tiny little hangers anymore. There's no one more messy than a mom with a child attached to her in the Target, which I completely understand, by the way. But in any event, those were my aspirations, frankly, at that point, were to not get up at 3 a.m., to not work a shift job like that, and to maybe get a bus driving job because it paid a union wage and had benefits. That's my aspirations. But then I met a mentor, and that changed everything.
Well, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I meet this woman, and she is she's a guidance counselor, psychologist at the school, and she basically says a GED isn't going to cut it. I mean, a no high school degree is not going to cut it. You have to get a GED. And I didn't even know what a GED was, frankly. I was completely consumed with doing my work. And so I said, okay, you do need a GED to apply for this bus driving job. So I got a GED. And she said, you know, you could go to college. And that was completely foreign. Nobody in my family had gone to college. I didn't know many people or anyone who had gone to college. And she said, why don't you just take the test and apply? And I got in. And then it was $216 per semester, and I couldn't afford it. And she paid. She paid for it.
Wow.
And she sent me to my first semester. And what is remarkable about this is I could not see what I could be, but she could. And so one of the things that I feel so devoted to in my research work and also in my just general way I try to contribute is that sometimes people can't see what they're capable of, and you need other people to see and aspire because they know. And that's what this woman did for me, Betsy. And she got me started, and then the rest is a crooked path of history where I go from University of Missouri St. Louis to University of Missouri Kansas City. I got a 4-year degree there. I got a master's at University of Illinois. I worked in the theater for a little bit because I wasn't sure what I really wanted to do, and I was in Chicago, so I did that. And then I got a PhD at Syracuse and went on to Northwestern, and I studied labor economics and microeconomics. And I decided to take my job at the Federal Reserve, which does macroeconomics and monetary policy, which I had no experience in, but I did it anyway. And here I am. And it's been a remarkable journey, but one that has greatly influenced what I study. And I think I can be one of those diverse voices that understands what it's like if you don't have a skill set that's going to match with the economy. Or what if you grow up in a family where you don't know all the options that are before you, or you can't afford all the options that are before you? It's really informed my study of income inequality and economic mobility. And I think more people like that in the Fed has made the Fed a stronger place. There's not just one of me now. There's many, many of me doing these types of things.
Sounds like a mentor and a sponsor was really important to you. I mean, certainly in you pursuing your college, your GED, and then your college education.
Completely. And
supporting that in a very tangible way, paying for it.
Right.
That's a big deal. Now, $216 a semester is no longer going to cut it.
No,
so,
that's going to get you a book.
But so can you talk about other sort of heroes and mentors in your life that have really influenced you along the way?
So I really loved to read, and one of the ways I escaped I grew up outside of St. Louis, and I escaped from being in a somewhat rural area outside of St. Louis by reading biographies and things. And a person I just really loved was Eleanor Roosevelt.
I love Eleanor Roosevelt.
Fell in love with Eleanor Roosevelt, right?
Yeah.
So I loved her. So I mean, what's not to love? And I read everything that I could find. I checked out every library book. I went to different libraries. When people would give me books, I would be cherishing them. And the thing that I loved the most about her is that she was willing to speak her mind and hold to her values, even when it was not popular. And I thought that was remarkable. And I just thought that was remarkable. I don't know why did you like her?
Well, the other thing is, conventionally she was just an unusual person, and so, but she was a leader in a time when, in the 30s and 40s, when people didn't think of women in that kind of role, especially
right,
the First Lady, kind of in the roles that she took, and then even after FDR died, she played this really important role in the United States, for our country.
She was, if you think back, that we have this language now from management schools and things that talk about value-based leadership. She was a value-based leader, and we didn't call them that then. We called them different things, but she was a values-based leader. Another thing that I really took to heart when I was growing up is I was unusual, right? I'm in a family that's not at the upper echelon of the income distribution, to say the least.
I like girls. I mean, this is like, in the kind of the way that I do. And so this is not a popular
This is
thing.
a shock to me. I didn't.
I know. I thought you invited me out.
I knew that something was going to
Research
come out of
director.
today's session, and now we have it.
So, but I just didn't, I was weird. I mean, I knew I was weird. I was walking past my 4th grade teacher and I wasn't wearing a coat or something, and she whispers over to the other teacher, she's unusual. And I thought, oh, I don't think that's a good thing. So I ready the special bus. So, but in any event, Eleanor Roosevelt was unusual. And yet, she also realized sometimes she had to invest in a skill set. So I read this great piece about her where she got on the radio because she was trying to influence people. And she was told she had a very grating voice. Didn't sound good. So you know what she did? She gets a voice coach. And she gets people to help her have a better voice because she wanted to be effective. And that, for me, when I was young, I thought, I don't have to have everything today. All I have to do is be willing to learn and to try. And then when I meet the mentor and she says, do this, I'm like, okay, if I'm willing to learn and to try, that can be the recipe. So I admired her for that.
Yeah, that's great. How about turning to today? So, one of the reasons that I have Mary here is she's one of my mentors and one of the people that I look to for advice and counsel. And one of the great things about the Federal Reserve System is you've got people across the country that can serve in that role, great leaders like Mary at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. But I'm sure there's people in the system that you've looked to for coaching and mentoring.
Absolutely, and I've been lucky. I've had many leaders and people help and sponsor me and mentor me in the system. But my great mentor in the system, the one who I look to all the time, is Janet Yellen. So I had the great fortune of knowing Janet because she worked at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, and so I got to know her in a material way, and she changed my career. I remember something so remarkable to me. We were doing our work one kind of way, mostly doing macro monetary policy forecasting, and labor economists like myself or microeconomists we were doing briefings, but we didn't really have a place at the table. So I'm walking out of the FOMC briefing one day and Janet's walking by me, and first of all, that's already like, wow, Janet Yellen's walking by me. And she says, Mary, I have to ask you something, because I was the head of the micro section at the time. She said, would you ever be interested in briefing on the labor market and how that's important in our economy? And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I've been handed the keys to the kingdom. And so I said, absolutely, yes. And then we went and got the team organized and we did that. So the reason I tell that story is Janet wasn't doing me a kindness. It ended up being incredibly supportive to me. But she was basically saying, I want people with diverse voices who study all kinds of different things to have a place at the table, a meaningful place. And I'm going to go find people who are willing to do that. And so that's one of the things I like about Janet. She's a leader who wants to get things done. She's voraciously curious, but she also is looking for people who can participate.
Has that relationship changed since she became chair? I mean, in terms of how she interacts with you or you with her? I'm just curious.
I think it's only grown. Yeah. It's grown. So I had right before she was vice chair and she was going to become chair. And I was giving a talk in front of a bunch of high school kids. And some of the young women, this was in a lower income community, some of the young women come up to me and they said, do you know Janet Yellen? And I said, I do. And they said, we read about her. And then they started asking me questions. And I was able to just, because I'm effusive about Janet, so I'm able to talk to two of them about Janet and how, she's just herself. We would term this in front of all of us, authentic leaders, but in front of them I said, she's just herself. She's not afraid to be who she is. She's curious, she's friendly, she cares about people, she cares about people like your parents and how you're going to do in the economy. And it was almost as if they touched me, they could touch Janet. And I could see the inspiration in their eyes because I'm telling them stories about Janet, so I wrote her and I told her this, and she was just over the moon. And that's the kind of relationship that I think the best leaders have. They have this humility of not knowing how big of an impact they make. But as Janet's moved up, she hasn't changed who she is, but her span of impact has grown. And so she's taken to that quite well, I think.
Well, speaking of being yourself, so on the way in, your great social media person, Ellen, handed us out all some cards twice around, your podcasts. And here it is. Here's the logo from your podcast. So these are these great podcasts on the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco website that really talk about sort of a range of things that we do. And I'm curious, one of the things that I was struck by is, so you're an economist, PhD, very accomplished. I can listen to these and I don't have to have I wouldn't have to take economics to understand them. The economics kind of sneaks up on you. And so in a really good way, there's no equations whatsoever involved. And it's not like the research papers that are 40 pages long and I can only understand the first two sometimes. But I can get it. So what inspired these podcasts and why did you do them?
So my co-host on the podcast, Jody Hoff, and I, working with Ellen Chan, we wanted to do a show about economics for the general public. And the thing we wanted to convey, and it was just the mission, was how cool economics is. Jody was an economics high school teacher and then became director of education, economic education in our bank. You know, I have a PhD in economics, I love it. So how do we do this? So we had to ask ourselves, I had to ask myself, why do I love economics? What is it about it that I just absolutely love? And the thing that came to me that's really true every day is that it helps me keep an open mind. Economists are trained to always ask, why do I believe that? Why is we have what we call priors, they're assumptions, they're our hypotheses, but why do I have that? And then let me test it, and then let me change it if it's no longer true, if the data conflict with it. So we started thinking about that as the idea that we're going to essentially question our beliefs. We all have beliefs, and beliefs are important. They're important in research because you have to start somewhere. They're important as people because they shape how we do things. They're the foundation of our interactions. But if we don't question those beliefs, just like if we don't question our assumptions in research, they become traps. We get trapped in our own belief system and we've never challenged it. So we decided that what we do twice around, where we basically use the lens of economics, which is non-judgmental, is not emotional. It's really just about, why do I have this belief? What are the trade-offs? What are the incentives? What are the pros and cons, the costs and benefits? And do I really want to keep it? And then we decided that largely it's more interesting. The way I use economics in my life anyway is I ask myself questions like, why aren't we all more grateful? Is happiness overrated? Should we be braver? Why are my biases getting in my way? These are all questions that we struggle with that economics can bring to the table. So that's how it snuck up on us.
Yeah, and one of the things I really liked about these is, you talked about the idea of dropping your arsenal of facts and using different lenses to look at questions. And this everyday bravery was one of your last ones that you did. So this idea, when we think of bravery, we think of the heroic bravery situation where somebody, pulls somebody out of a burning building, or somebody steps up in a really unusual situation and saves somebody's life or something. We all kind of, in our mind, think, well, that's when we think of bravery. But you talked about bravery in a different way, everyday bravery, something that's more intentional. And the great thing about this is that it's something that all of us could do every day. And so talk a little bit about that.
Well, for me, for us doing the podcast, you don't get that many chances in your life to run into a burning building, thankfully. But it's also very instinctual. We've had from the tragic events of the last several weeks, the natural disasters and the less natural ones in Las Vegas, that essentially you're just in the moment, you do the right thing, you act, and then afterwards, I don't know if any of you have ever done a heroic act like that, afterwards you think, what did I just do? And the shock kind of sets in, but that's an automatic response. What is important about everyday bravery and why it's so courageous is you have to think about it. You get that feeling in your stomach and you think, oh man, I don't want to do this. I don't want to stand up for this person who's being bullied. I don't want to do an act of kindness for someone who's unpopular because I don't know how other people will feel about me. I don't want to raise my hand and say that's not okay, or I don't want to step back. Let's just talk about the Fed. I don't want to step back and let someone else take the lead because I'm worried the wheels will come off the cart and I'll get in trouble or something like that. There's all these things we don't want to do, but when we do them, those are very inspiring to the people around us, and those are acts of everyday bravery. And I witnessed so many of those in my life that I try to think about how I can do one on a regular basis.
That's great.
It's hard to do them, but it's something when you do them, they feel good.
Well, one of the reasons you're here is it is National Coming Out Day, and one of the reasons why the ERN, the 9 Pride ERN said this would be a great day to have you here is because of that. I will say, so after I learned, I told people that we were having you come here. I heard from a couple of reserve banks that you beat us to it. So that's why we're really pleased to offer this up to the rest of the Federal Reserve System. So we're really happy everybody's here. One of the things we talked about this morning, we met with the ERN this morning at breakfast. It was just great to meet with everybody. we talked about is this concept of coming out at work and whether that's important to do and what benefits or challenges you see in doing so.
Well, I think that, it's easy to think of the challenges, and we heard stories this morning that itemize some of the challenges, and I faced some challenges myself about coming out at work. A lot of those challenges are fear of how you'll be perceived, whether those fears are realized or not. I feel like I've lived in a good place in San Francisco where they probably weren't going to materially constrain me, but my fear itself constrained me. So those are the challenges. But what are the benefits? And the moving part of what I heard this morning and the things I've experienced in my own life are the benefits are you get to bring your whole self to work. And how great is that you bring your whole self to work, but also do we really want half of people coming to work? Or do we want the whole person coming to work? And that is a theme that that resonated for me. I've been with my partner, my spouse, for almost 28 years now. And when we first went to the Federal Reserve in San Francisco, I was super nervous. I didn't say anything. I didn't know. I'm trying to get a job. Jobs are not easy to come by if you're an economist. And so I stayed quiet. And then there was a party, and I said to one of the people I trusted, I said, would it be okay if I brought Shelley? And he said, we were waiting for you to be comfortable to tell us you wanted to bring her. She's always welcome and included. And suddenly Shelley became every bit as much part of my workplace as I am. And that's part of our fabric now. And it was a great day for me. That happened very early in my career, 20 years ago. But it's been a great day for me. And it's been a great part of our life because Shelley and I are so connected in our lives. I've been able to bring my family, if you will, to my work and my work to my family. And that blend has been really wonderful. And I think that's what I heard this morning at the ERN, that when you can do that, it's an amazing thing. It gives the workplace something great, and it gives the individual something special. There's a freedom to that is truly remarkable.
Yeah, no, and how about, so one of the things we've talked about in this organization is that support structure, because the acceptance at work and accepting all others to be the best people they can be. We heard that this morning. Thinking about, so Minneapolis created the flag here that will show up on the board. This is a human pride flag. This was done this year to support LGBTQ employees in the workplace. How important are these kinds of messages to people in your community?
Well, for me, they're essential. I think they're essential. And I'm going to tell you, now I'm warming up, I can get a little more personal. I'm going to tell you two stories about these. That Shelley and I went to San Francisco, as I said, and we happened to be looking for housing when we're going to move in July, which is the same day as the Pride Parade. And we're in the first Pride Parade ever in our lives in San Francisco. And remember the Pride Parade ended in front of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. And so I'm there, and it's the Pride Parade, and Shelley and I are watching, and this most remarkable thing happens that I had never seen in my entire life, which is the people who are allies started walking by. The parents, the grandparents, Pacific Gas and Electric. I mean, we were choked up because all these people who were not gay, they were not LGBTQ, A+, they were just people. And they believed, and they said, we're with you. And I remember that. It was so moving, and it was the first time in my life, and I think Shelley's too, where we thought, we belong. These people love us, and they don't even know us. And that was a great thing. So when I see a flag like this, and we did our own version in San Francisco, I have a sense that, you can be invited to the table. So we've been invited, communities have been invited for a long time, but it's very different than being claimed by the people who've invited you. I don't know how many of you have had this experience, I'm sure almost everyone has, where you go to a party or a work function or somewhere where you're completely uncomfortable because you don't know anybody. And then one of the in crowd comes over and says, you're with me. And that sense of belonging just is palpable, right? You can feel it. I mean, if you remember a situation for yourself, you can feel how it felt. That's how it feels when members of my community, our community, see the flag and see all of you as allies and supporters joining with us to make it. And it's an incredibly moving thing that I take with me and all the time, every day, basically.
Yeah, and allies are really important. And can you maybe give me a little more detail about what what I can do as an ally to the community, and what would help. And we have a lot of, for example, long service employees, and one of the things that I'm always struck by is, is there people in our organization that have a friend at work? Do they have a group of people? One of the reasons why we formed these ERNs, we actually heard this morning from somebody who said, I assume we always had one of these,
right.
and or boy, this is great that I have a place I can connect with immediately when I come to the organization. How important is that connection and the role that allies can play with the community?
Well, I think it's essential. Just to hit this note again, diversity and inclusion are important. Diversity is important. You have to get the voices to the table. You have to have the diversity. But if you don't include people, then you actually haven't accomplished very much. All you've done is you've accomplished what I call optical fairness. You've got visual fairness. It looks great, but that's not the same as being great. And so these ERNs, these allies, what I feel the allies do is you see us for people. You see us for the contributions we make, the intellectual contributions we make, the way we interact. You appreciate us for who we are as people, and you look past the categories and you see us. And once you've seen us, then you can help other people who might get caught on the category move past that. There's just nothing like having someone who is from a group of people who may not understand what it's like, to have someone from that group say, I know these people and they're not. Just look past the category. I think that is super helpful. So it's not only the support, it's really the inclusion. And that's why when we were at the ERN breakfast this morning, and there's so many allies at the breakfast, that felt great to me. I think that's really essential.
Going back to diversity, one of the things I know you've been a big part of is sort of looking at the diversity of people in the economic profession at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco in particular, and other things you're trying to do at your Reserve Bank and really across the system, working with others to enhance our diversity and inclusion efforts. Can you talk a little bit about some of those things?
Yeah, so, about a year ago now, I guess, the San Francisco Fed launched a campaign called Diversity and Inclusion, No Excuses. And when we did it, I was really pleased to see that we were not the only group in the system having such a campaign, that they didn't call it that necessarily, but there was just this groundswell of recognition around the system that diversity and inclusion is absolutely essential, and that we can't have excuses anymore. We can't say, the pipeline of economists isn't very diverse, so no wonder we don't have many diverse people. We've got to be the change, if you will. And so we've been doing that at the San Francisco Fed by really trying to build the pipeline by going to colleges and trying to recruit people not just to come to work for us, but to major in economics or other STEM fields that would help them be in those areas of expertise. But now we're going to go to the high schools. So that's great. San Francisco is doing it, but I just want to take a minute to talk about this group that I'm the executive sponsor of, that I think is an example of innovation and putting away the silos and the sometimes parochial ways we think about each bank. And they just abandoned all that, and they said, it's this CRISM group. They abandoned all that, and they said, you know what? In order to bend the curve of new economists coming in, we got to start with research assistants. And in order to do that, we need to have a one system portal for people to see diverse voices, diverse faces, and learn about all the banks at the same time. And we need to assemble these schools that banks can go to, the research departments can go to in their communities and recruit. And we need to think of us as a system, because it doesn't really matter in the end if those individuals go to San Francisco or the Board of Governors or Philadelphia. It just matters that we have them in the system. So when I saw what the work they were doing, and they're already really far ahead of so many of the aspirations I had, and they asked me to be the executive sponsor, I said yes. But a big shout out to this group, because this is the kind of initiative that I think it's going to take, and it's an example of that values-based leadership that we were talking about before. You hold your value about what you want to accomplish, and then you let all the other things that often get in our way, at least they get in my way at the Fed system, that you think about my bank versus somebody else's bank, or all kinds of other things that challenge us, but that was all put aside. So bravo to those types of those things,
Yeah.
But I think it's really important to do more broadly.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I picked a heck of a day not to wear a watch, but I think we've probably exceeded my time not to talk too much here. But let's open it up to the rest of the crowd. We'd love to hear your questions. Mary's told me this morning that everything is wide open.
Yeah,
So-
if you know, when people learn about me, there's really no question I won't answer.
So we've seen a little bit of that already, so thank you for that.
So, is this on? No. No, it's not. So, tell me a little bit more about that picture with the skateboard and flooded and all that. What all that means to you?
Oh, okay. That's a great question. So so this is my office. It's the part that's my desk is over on the other side. But this picture was taken by they did a profile of me in Bloomberg, and it was titled "From GED to PhD." And then they said I'm doing work on wages for Chair Yellen, Vice Chair Yellen. So that was a really cool thing for me. And the photographer came and he took this picture. And I have a skateboard in my office. I use it as a footstool now because my partner, so 28 years does a lot of things. One thing it does is it says, if you don't wear a helmet, you can't skateboard. And I don't want to wear a helmet because it would mess up my hair. So I now use the skateboard as my platform when I have a standing desk. So I have the skateboard, which I love. I love all things fast and probably not good for me. And the flooded sign is something that Shelley got for me, actually. I love street signs. I don't know why I love them. If there's one laying around and it doesn't have to go back to the vendor or the state that is made it, I'll take it home with me. So she found this for me because I sometimes get flooded with things. I'm so interested in all kinds of things that I won't say no to anything, and that's not my best thing. So she gives me that flooded sign so that I keep it there all the time. I think she thought I would put it up only when I was flooded, but that's kind of a natural state for me, so I just have it up there all the time. And then that piece of art there is a welded sculpture. I didn't make it myself, but I do weld and make welded sculpture and do art projects, and I saw it. It's made out of farm equipment. And I grew up in the Midwest. I love farming, and this was made on a farm in actually Pennsylvania, and I got it in Philadelphia. So I brought that home, and that's sort of I like to have. I love my job, and I love to have the things that I love about me as part of it. So my office, if you came into it, they didn't even show the other part, but it's just it's a reflection of who I am, and I don't mind that. I think that makes it. At least you know me when you walk in. You either love it or you don't love it, but you know me.
Any other questions?
All right. Thanks for coming, Mary. We have really good friends that are married, and they went to Guatemala to adopt their children. But they were really afraid that if the people they were adopting from knew they were married, that they wouldn't be able to take their kids home. So, one introduced the other as just her girlfriend, that she came along to support her, to help carry, because they're adopting too. So the babies were only put under one of their name, and then they had to really work that to get it under both their names later. But have you ever run into a situation like that? And as a mentor to all of us, what kind of advice would you give someone in how to approach that and deal with it?
So one thing that this is going to be a reflection of how I approach the world, and there are many ways to approach the world, so I'm not saying this is the right one. But I am very focused on being effective. And I don't get too caught up in fighting a battle each time if I think it's going to interrupt my effectiveness. So if I wanted to adopt children from Guatemala and I was uncomfortable with whether that was going to be able to happen, I would weigh the costs of that omission against the benefits of having those children and maybe what those children could have as a life with me and my partner. And I would then know I'm going to pay the price for having to come back and redo the paperwork, and I think that is a reasonable thing to do. But if you told me the opposite story, that individuals had and this is where being an economist comes in so handy. If you had said these individuals felt compelled to say the truth and they kept getting turned down, then it really comes down to this. There's a cost to being forthcoming, and there's a benefit. And there's a benefit to having the children, and there's a cost, right? And you have to weigh those, and each individual, whoever that is, has to make the decision for him or herself. And and decide what's going to be right for you, basically. That's how I've always done it. What's right for me? But there is hardly anything in life that's worth having that doesn't involve a trade-off. That's just the fact. And it's what makes it great about being human and what makes it such a pain in the neck. But it is, so my mentoring with someone, anyone who faces these types of trade-offs is try to find what's true to you and then try to hold to that. And if you do that, you'll sleep well at night and your regrets will be low even if the pain is high.
Speaking of trade-offs, I'm one of the things, going back to your twice around comments, your podcast, this gratefulness concept, I thought was a neat idea, and the idea that, that's something, again, we can practice every day. And Mary and I share a dear colleague, Teresa Curran, who passed away, and that inspired that piece on gratefulness, I think, if I remember correctly.
It did completely.
Yeah.
So Teresa Curran was so many things that are wonderful. But one of the things that was remarkable about her is that she recognized that gratitude said every day actually makes these huge contributions to people's lives. These small acts of kindness change people in a whole way you don't know. So when she passed away, there was a memorial service, and Jody and I we both went, and we were so moved by this memorial service, we decided to do an episode in recognition of her, but to focus on something that she had in spades, essentially. She was very grateful, but it was intentional. It was a practice. It was like meditation. It was a practice. It wasn't that Teresa was a better person. She very well was, but it wasn't that she was just a better person than people who practiced it less. Is that just we don't focus on it. And the thing that we often don't focus on, at least this is what I've recognized about myself, is that we don't focus on the benefits. We only focus on the cost. So if you're thinking about, should I send the card, not send the card? Well, it's a pain to write the card. I gotta get a card. Maybe they won't like the card. Maybe I'll get rejected. Those are all costs. But we don't actually think about the benefits. They'll get a sparkle in their eye. They'll say, oh my gosh. But if you ever give somebody a card, go back to their cube or their office, and you'll see that card is pinned to the bulletin board, or it's in a special drawer, or if you send them an email, it's in a special email box that they keep that says things that I should look at when it's been a terrible day. So these are all ways in which you can make a contribution, and it's just part of being intentional about it. And Teresa had that, so it was a way we could help. When I think about trying to live in the legacy of Teresa, that's the thing I bring to my life every day.
And there's a neat link between our discussion about allies and the role they play in this idea of gratefulness, and how that can help people feel
right
included, how that can make them feel who they are, appreciate who they are in their organization, and feel like they're part of it.
Absolutely. I think just self-reflection for all of you. As you think about it, just think of the days when you felt like $1 million here and you thought, oh, I'm going to stay here. This is the place I'm going to be. It rarely has to do with, wow, I reached that output goal, or man, that was fantastic. It was some personal interaction. It was somebody saying something to you that was amazing and made your day and made you think, okay, this is a great place to work. And that gratefulness and allied support is what we need. We all need friends at work.
Yeah, I think we've added maybe 10,000 more hits to your podcast.
I hope so.
Jody and you are great together. I mean, I will say, I love the dynamic between the two of you.
Well, we've been friends for almost, 12 years now, and it shows. And, in the podcast, you can hear it, in that we go back and forth from we have high regard for each other, but we also have the little squabbles of maybe sisters, I think, at this point, which is, is the glass half full, is it half empty? I'm a half full person, Jody's a half empty person, and we would fight to the death over, she'd say, if there's a drop in the glass, I'd say, oh, that drop, look, it's almost full, and if there's a drop missing, she'll say, who took my drop? And so back and forth we go, but it's a wonderful example, frankly, of the idea that diversity is important. Jody and we come with very unique backgrounds, different from each other, but we have this great affinity for each other, and our conversations make each of us better. So I hope that's what comes out in Twice Around.
Yeah,
that's certainly what came out for me.
It does, and the thing I liked about it, something that it's a good intentional practice we should do in our everyday work here on a day-to-day basis, is you ask at the end, well, what did I learn? What did we learn from today?
Right.
And it seems like we often go through a meeting or a day and we don't really ask ourselves that question, well, what did we learn? What did we get from it? I think that's a great feature.
Well, Twice Around's all about, the tagline for it is where we take a second look at the beliefs that shape us. And so we did 10 episodes, and I'd say those 10 episodes were like an exploration for us, and I changed my views on many, many things just doing the exploration in front of 1 million listeners. So
You're a PhD and you change your views, Mary.
it's shocking.
Yeah. I thought you would know everything, but occasionally, every once in a while, you learn something
Well,
that
there's
changes your
We
perspective.
get teased all the time. There's only two perceptions of economists. We never change our minds, or we don't have any. We change them all the time. We don't know what we should be doing. So the truth is, we change our minds just like everybody else,
That's great.
And we do it with the data, though.
Just
Just so you know, we're empirical.
More questions here.
Hi, I'm curious, following up on your half-full self-identification. There's a lot of work right now in economics. I think you even yourself released a paper on the disparate returns to education for people of color. And having spent so long in the field, I'm curious if you do have hope about the growing number of and diversity of eyes being brought to the problem, and where you see those potentials for change, or whether like where the areas of work are that we really still need to roll up our sleeves and continue to change the way we approach these problems.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are times in my career where it's been hard to have hope, right? And early in my career, I remember I wanted to study educational policy. And so I was at the University of Chicago at a seminar or an all-day conference, and by the end of the day I thought, I can't study education, it's just too depressing, we can't move the needle. And so I went off to study other things and kind of gave up. But I remember asking my professor at the time, and I've held to this now and I'm returning to it, I said, poverty and these intractable problems, they seem too hard to solve. And he said, Mary, we change poverty one person at a time. And so when I keep that in mind, then I don't get so discouraged. And so I do have hope. So how do I released a paper on the black-white wage gap. And that black-white wage gap is largest for the most educated. So education alone is not going to solve our problems, because people with bachelor's degrees have larger gaps than people with high school degrees. So what's it about? Well, that's where I have some hope. And I get two ways I have hope. One way I have hope is that we actually know that a lot of it has to do with the career ladder people are on. And so communities like these ERNs, whether they're LGBTQ or Mosaic or other ones that are these groups of people who are saying, well, you're underserved, so let's try to figure out how to create sponsorship in your workplaces. Those are essential. And so I think this is where I'm hopeful. We have sponsorship programs, we have ERNs, we have ways to engage people so that people with diverse backgrounds stick at their jobs and have career progressions that look like the majority groups. So that's one place I have hope. Another place I have hope is that, now bear with me for a minute, but we're facing slow growth in our country. We have an aging population, so they're retiring, so our labor force growth is just going to slow. Our productivity growth has come back to where it was in the 1970s, so we're looking at growth of around 2% as the norm, or even less than 2%, as opposed to 3.5%, which we're used to. So where might we make some progress? How can we make ourselves grow faster? Well, one way we can make ourselves grow faster is to start to close these education gaps that exist between Asians, whites, and then African Americans and Hispanics. The data are pretty striking. If you're a recent graduate, you're in your early 20s, graduation rates for the Asian population from college are in the 80 to 90% range. For whites, it's more like 40 to 50. And then if you go to African Americans and Hispanics, it's more like 25, 20%. So just closing those gaps can help us have improved skill sets and help us grow our economy. So I have some hope that because we have a necessity to grow faster, that we will invest in the things that will help that happen. So that I am a glass half full. I'm an ultimate optimist, but I also am doubling down. So that's part of it. I'm doubling down and trying to influence policy in a way that can help these outcomes.
This is an area where I've been proud of the fact that the Federal Reserve is really taking on more directly than we have in the past. A good example, I'll put a pitch in for Federal Reserve Bank Minneapolis Inclusive Growth Institute.
Absolutely.
And asking the important questions about, what's going on, what's happening, why are we getting these disparate results? Not all boats are rising together. And to recognize that, and I think we're looking at, I think the rest of the system is looking at, how we can research and look at them.
Well, 2 weeks ago, I was at a conference called Labor Market Disparities Conference at the Board of Governors, hosted, but where they were bringing all different kinds of people in, sociologists, political scientists, economists, in the system, outside of the system. And the real question was along the lines of this inclusive growth. We have a recovering economy now, but what are the outcomes that we face, and which ones do we really want to go after? And even if the Federal Reserve toolkit doesn't help us move the needle on those things, we still want to be informed. We are a good source of intellectual capital. We want to be thinking about these things and informing other policymakers if it's in their purview to make those changes. So I think these are broad efforts across the system. Minneapolis has been great at this, and I think it's going to be helpful. It's another reason I have optimism.
Great, thank you.
I have a question for Mary about this person who paid for your college, Betsy. So you started, that was a great story, but I want to know how the story ended. It's like, does she see where you ended up, and is she just as proud as punch for you?
So I've had, I had a remarkable experience in my life that I will share because it was just the place where we got to bring all these people together. So I've had great mentors. I had Betsy. I had one of my professors, Gene Wagner, from University of Missouri, Kansas City. He was a fantastic mentor, he and his wife. On and on it goes, right? And so I got the good fortune. I was just very fortunate to win a Defying the Odds award from my alma mater, UMKC, maybe 3 years ago. And so what Shelley and I got to do is we went back and found all of the different people who I felt had contributed. My 6th grade best friend, my Betsy, Gene Wagner, Paul and Sarah Schmidtline, who had helped me, people in my current life who had helped me. And we brought them all to a dinner the night before the event. We invited them all to the event. And then I went through and after the dinner, I gave an appreciation for what each one had done that had moved me forward. And I said something which I truly believe it takes a village. I mean, that's a canned term or phrase, but it does. I would never, ever have made it if all of those people hadn't participated. And so my gains are things I would absolutely want to share with them. It's also what compels me to feel like it's important to give back. I have a responsibility to carry the torches they gave me and then give them and try to even double my impact. So she knows. In fact, I just had, I visited St. Louis for a St. Louis Fed conference, and she lives in St. Louis, and had dinner with her, keep in touch, and it's just one of those great things that, we always need our mentors even when we're older. So, and I keep mine close.
And Janet.
I need you to talk me out of my despair.
I'm like so good at that.
Good.
You can tell me if I'm right.
I'm so inspired listening to what you're saying in at least 2 categories. One is the your faith in the value of knowledge and scientific inquiry, and where forming a good understanding of things can help us solve problems, on the one hand, and also your faith in the value of diversity and inclusion and welcoming all to the table. And then I look at what's going on in Washington and what we know about how we got to this place where we are right now, where scientific inquiry seems not to matter. We're in a post-truth world where there appears to be a powerful backlash that's sometimes spoken out loud and sometimes not. You just look at the Charlottesville business and this, we want to take our country back, et cetera, et cetera. And I have moments where it feels like we're on the losing end of this conversation. You don't act like you feel like you're on the losing end of the conversation. So I'd like to know how you cope with this world we're in today.
So, Neil mentioned several occasions Twice Around. So in one of the episodes of Twice Around, we can't remember what it's called, but it was basically, do the facts matter? And the question we had was, are the facts important? And surely the facts are, and science is. And if I think of myself as a value-based leader, one of the values I hold dear is evidence-based policymaking. But facts are not the only thing that matters. My partner's a psychologist, so I've had the great benefit of having a psychologist influence my thinking over my career. And feelings also matter, emotions matter. And so when I see some of the divisiveness going on in the country, people squaring off, opposing each other, don't go to, they're just uninformed about facts, and if I throw more facts their way, they're going to become more friendly with each other. I go to something's hurting on both sides. They're both suffering, and that is, once I've identified the problem, then I have more of a way to think about a solution. So one area where I feel optimistic, and we're working in the Federal Reserve of San Francisco to try to put this into another podcast, is that people don't understand each other. We don't understand the economies we each live in. We don't understand what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. We try to understand, but most of our understanding is created by a media impression, and that's mostly a story told about people as opposed to a story told by people. So if we can, and the Federal Reserve is uniquely, I think, situated to do these types of things. We have community outreach groups, we have CD groups, we have our economic advisory councils and things. We can make community connections in a way that help people introduce themselves to each other. Tell the story of what it's like to live in a fracking town when fracking's high and fracking's low. What it's like to live in the Central Valley in California, where the unemployment rate for permanent white residents is pretty high, and yet we import labor each year to pick seasonal crops. What's it like to live in those economies, and how do ultimately people get along? Because when you go to communities, I travel all over the United States, something is actually quite remarkable. People do get along. They do make it work. They do go to the same schools. They do go to the same churches. They do shop in the same grocery store. So these economies that take place at this zip code level, they actually work better than we would think anything worked if we were just listening to the debates in Washington, D.C. So yes, I'm hopeful, but that doesn't mean I'm complacent. I'm not just Pollyanna-ish. You've got to back up. Hope is not a strategy, remember? So you got to back up hope with work. And so the work is, for all of us, it's kind of a call to action, which is to help introduce people who don't know each other and the lifestyles people live to each other. And these employee resource networks is just an example of how we're doing it at the workplace. If we can do that at the workplace, we can scale it and do it in broader communities. So that's my view, and that's what I'm doubling down on that. So
Over here.
Mary, I just wanted to first thank you for sharing your story. It's me right here. I was just curious if you find the time or have the time to do mentoring outside in the community in San Francisco.
I do. It's something that I just believe in completely, and so I do as much mentoring as I can within the system. And I do mentoring in my community, and I've even done, I'm trying to do mentoring on a bigger scale. I'm working again with Jody Hoff and her team in education. One thing that we've learned is that first generation college attendees, those are kids their family members have never gone to college. I was a first gen. We struggle, right? I almost dropped out my first semester, and because I was too ashamed to go and tell people I needed help. And because, so we're developing an online tool to do online mentoring so that people can get resources from people in the Fed system even when we can't meet them face to face. So I think we should, I'm trying to find all kinds of different platforms where we can expand our range, but I think that's a really important way for us to give back, because remember, we change things one person at a time. And I take my advisor's advice to heart on that. I don't know if that was too long of an answer, but I truly believe mentoring outside of the Fed and inside the Fed are critical.
I have a question. We focused a lot on what you've done well. You've been very successful. I'm wondering if you can talk about a time when you took a risk and it worked out, and also a time when you took a risk and it failed.
Sure.
And how that impacted you.
So I took
Besides today.
Yeah.
This is a risk where it worked out, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's what.
just
That's
need to
why
clarify
I
for
was like,
everybody
oh my gosh,
here.
does he have one of those pulse buttons going down? No liking. Ellen Chan, my colleagues back there with the no likes. So The risk that worked was to go to college. I mean, that was a big risk for me. I really was frightened out of my mind. I had no money. I hadn't been to school since I was 15. So I'm just like, man, am I gonna be able to do this? And I struggled. And so that was a huge risk, and it worked out. And the only way that risk worked out is I asked for help. I didn't just try to go it on my own. So that's going to be nice juxtaposition to the risk I took that totally failed on me. And one of the reasons I love Janet so much is because the risk I took that failed was with Janet. So I was all excited. Remember I told you that great story about how she said, can you come do these things? So I was super excited. And they asked me if I'd work on a speech for Janet on income inequality. So I said, absolutely. And then I didn't ask for any help. I didn't know what I was doing. I'm in way over my head. And she has to pull in other people. So I failed, basically. She has to call in, John Williams still teases me, he's the president of the Fed, he still teases me because he was there at the time as the speech. But seriously, it was painful for me because I took this risk to jump into a big pool, and I felt too old and too experienced to ask for help because I thought if I asked for help there, unlike when I did muster up the courage to ask for help when I was in college, that people would think less of me. Well, that didn't go so well. So I fail, and then they have to bring in other people to do the speech. And you know, that failure taught me that taking risks is great. Being uncomfortable when you take a risk is what's going to happen. But the important thing with risks is you have to have that bravery. And that's what I lacked at that point in time. I took the risk, that was brave, but I didn't have the second part of the bravery, which is, well, you're going to need a support team. You're going to need allies. And when you take risks, make sure you have a team and make sure you're brave enough. That's what I tell myself. Make sure you're brave enough to do the hard work to get the support you need to be successful.
What a great way to pay it forward to the rest of us, though, to actually share an example where you failed with Chair Yellen. And being able to tell all us about that, and you're still around, right?
I'm still around.
Yeah, she's still here.
And Janet's, Janet has many great qualities. And one of them is she's gracious.
Yeah.
And she assured me, I remember emailing her, so this happened in November. It's now New Year's Day, right, after this November. And I'm emailing her on New Year's Day saying, Janet, one of the worst parts of my year was that I did this. And she emails me back and she says, oh my gosh, Mary, stop thinking about that thing. I stopped thinking about it. But it's just a graciousness. She emails me back on New Year's Day. She puts me out of my misery, which was substantial. And I went on and I survived and I learned a lot. So that's what mentors really do. They give you room to fail and then they pick you up, dust you off and say, don't worry about it. Go watch football.
Yeah. Well, Mary, we learned so much from you today. Thank you so much for spending time with our group. Thanks also to 9 Pride, Federal Reserve Bank, Minneapolis Employee Resource Network for sponsoring this event. And thanks for all of you joining us today in person and also at the other Reserve Banks, the Board of Governors, and in the public. Thanks so much, Mary.
It was my pleasure.